I was standing on my back porch, watching the sunrise over 300 acres of prime Missouri farmland when I saw the golf cart parade coming down my dirt road like a pack of hyenas closing in on wounded prey. It was barely 6 in the morning, and I'd already been up for 2 hours checking on the cattle in the south pasture. My name is Brandon Paterson, and I'm a third-generation farmer who inherited this land from my grandfather. The property sits just outside the growing suburban sprawl of Springfield, Missouri, where new developments seem to pop up every month like mushrooms after a rainstorm. My farm has been in the family since 1947, long before any of these cookie-cutter neighborhoods existed, and I intended to keep it that way until the day I died. The golf carts came to a stop at the edge of my property, right where my land met the newly paved road that the Meadowbrook Heights development had put in last year. I counted 5 carts total, each one carrying middle-aged people in polo shirts and khaki shorts like they were heading to a country club instead of harassing a farmer at dawn. Leading the pack was a woman I had seen before, the infamous Brenda Cunningham, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. She had blonde hair that looked like it got professionally styled 3 times a week and wore enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. I took a sip of my coffee and waited. They were still technically on the road, not my property, so I was not about to give them the satisfaction of walking down there. If they wanted to talk to me, they could come to my door like civilized people. Sure enough, after about 5 minutes of what looked like heated discussion, Brenda dismounted her golf cart and started marching up my driveway. She had a manila folder clutched in her hands like it was the Holy Grail. 2 other people followed her, a thin man with a comb-over who looked like an accountant, and a younger woman carrying what appeared to be a camera. I set my coffee down and walked to the front of the house, meeting them halfway down the driveway. My property had no fence along the road, just a simple wooden sign that read, "Paterson Farm, Private Property, No Trespassing," that my grandfather had carved himself. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I already knew this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. Brenda stopped about 10 feet away from me, which I appreciated. She held up the manila folder like it was a weapon. "Mr. Paterson, I am Brenda Cunningham, president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. We need to discuss a very serious matter regarding your property." "My property is not part of your HOA," I said flatly, "so there is nothing to discuss." "That is where you are wrong," she said, and I could hear the smugness in her voice. "You see, when our development was approved by the county, certain boundaries were established. According to our research, approximately 40 acres of what you claim is your property actually falls within our HOA boundaries." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she had just said. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. My property lines have been surveyed and recorded with the county since 1947. You can't just decide that part of my farm belongs to your neighborhood. The thin man stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Paterson, I am Gerald Whitmore, treasurer of the HOA. We have documentation showing that the original county survey from 2022, when our development was approved, includes a portion of your southeastern boundary. This means you are technically a member of our association and subject to all rules and fees." "Southeastern boundary," I repeated slowly. "That is where my main cattle pasture is. You are telling me that my grazing land, which has been in my family for almost 80 years, somehow belongs to your HOA?" Brenda opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "We have here a notice of violation, a demand for 4 years of back dues totaling $18,000, and a list of compliance issues that must be addressed immediately." The younger woman with the camera started taking pictures of my house, my truck, and my barn in the distance. I held up my hand. "Stop taking pictures of my property right now." "We have every right to document violations," Brenda said. "Your barn is not up to HOA standards. The paint is peeling, and the structure is an eyesore that negatively impacts property values in Meadowbrook Heights." I felt my blood pressure rising. My barn was built in 1952 and is in perfect working condition. It is a barn, not a decoration, and you have no authority over anything on my property. Gerald pulled out another sheet of paper. "We also need to address your livestock. The HOA covenants strictly prohibit farm animals within the community boundaries. You will need to remove all cattle, chickens, and any other animals within 30 days. You have lost your minds, I said, my voice rising. This is a working farm. I have 300 acres here. Your little neighborhood is not even half that size. How exactly do you think any of my land falls within your boundaries? Brenda's face hardened. The county survey does not lie, Mr. Paterson. We have consulted with our attorney, and he has confirmed that we have a legitimate claim. You can either comply voluntarily, or we will be forced to take legal action. We are also authorized to place liens on your property for unpaid dues. Let me make something very clear, I said, taking a step forward. They all took a step back. You're not placing liens on anything. You're not annexing my property, and you sure as hell are not telling me what I can or cannot do on land that has been in my family for generations. Now get off my driveway before I call the sheriff. There is no need for threats, Gerald said nervously. We are simply trying to enforce the rules that all community members must follow. I am not a community member, I said through gritted teeth. I was here first. Your development was built next to my farm, not the other way around. Now leave. Brenda straightened her shoulders and gave me a cold smile. You will be hearing from our attorney, Mr. Paterson. We tried to handle this civilly, but if you want to do this the hard way, so be it. They turned and walked back to their golf carts, the young woman still snapping pictures as they went. I watched them drive away, my hands clenched into fists. This was insane. There was no way their HOA had any claim to my land. But the fact that they had showed up with official-looking documents and threats of legal action meant I needed to take this seriously. I went back inside and immediately called my friend Marcus Chen, who worked as a surveyor in Springfield. If anyone could help me sort out this mess, it was him. He answered on the third ring. Bah. Marcus, it is Brandon. I need a favor. Actually, I need your professional services. I just had the HOA from that new development show up at my house, claiming that 40 acres of my farm belongs to them. There was a pause. They what? Yeah. They are saying some county survey from 2022 puts part of my property within their boundaries. Can you come out and do a survey to confirm my actual property lines? Brandon, I did the survey for that development when it was being built. There is no way it encroaches on your land. Your property is clearly marked and recorded. Someone is either lying or working with bad information. Can you prove it? I asked. Because they are threatening to sue me and put liens on my property. I will be there this afternoon, Marcus said, and I will bring all the original survey documents. This sounds like someone is trying to pull a fast one. After I hung up with Marcus, I called my insurance company to see if my property insurance included any legal coverage. The representative told me that while they covered liability issues, property disputes were not included. She recommended I contact an attorney who specialized in real estate law. I spent the next hour searching online for attorneys in Springfield who dealt with property disputes. Most of them had consultation fees of several $100s, and their hourly rates were steep. I was not poor by any means, but farming was not exactly a lucrative business. Most of my assets were tied up in the land and equipment. A lengthy legal battle could bankrupt me. Then I remembered something my grandfather had told me years ago. He had a friend from his time in the Army who had gone into law and eventually became involved in Missouri politics. I racked my brain trying to remember the name. Thomas something. Thomas Wright. That was it. I had no idea if the man was even still alive, but it was worth a shot. I did a quick internet search and felt my jaw drop. Thomas Wright was not just some attorney, he was the Attorney General of Missouri. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. There was no way I could just call up the Attorney General and ask for help with an HOA dispute. But then again, what did I have to lose? I found the contact information for the Attorney General's office and dialed the number, expecting to get a receptionist who would politely tell me to hire a private attorney. Instead, I got a young man who listened to my situation and then said something that surprised me. Sir, property rights and fraudulent land claims actually fall under our jurisdiction, especially if there is evidence of intentional misrepresentation. Can you hold for a moment? I held for about 3 minutes before a different voice came on the line. This one was older, with a deep authoritative tone that commanded respect. This is Attorney General Thomas Wright. Am I speaking with Brandon Paterson? Yes, sir, I said, my throat suddenly dry. I do not know if you remember my grandfather, Robert Paterson. He said you two served together in the Army. There was a moment of silence, then a warm chuckle. Bobby Paterson. I've not thought about him in years. How's he doing? He passed away 5 years ago, sir. He left me his farm just outside Springfield. I'm sorry to hear that. Bobby was a good man, one of the best I ever served with. Now, what is this about an HOA trying to claim your land? I explained the entire situation, from the early morning visit to the threats of liens and lawsuits. Thomas listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes on a keyboard. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said when I finished. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA is claiming that a county survey from 2022 shows 40 acres of your property falls within their boundaries, despite the fact that your land has been surveyed and recorded since 1947. That is correct, sir. And they are demanding back dues and threatening to force you to remove your livestock and comply with HOA regulations. Yes, sir. Well, that is interesting because I personally reviewed the approval documents for that development when it was being proposed. There was a specific clause that the HOA boundaries would not extend beyond the actual developed lots. If they are claiming otherwise, someone has either falsified documents or is attempting to commit fraud. My heart started beating faster. So you are saying they do not have a legal claim? I am saying that based on what you have told me, this sounds like an attempt to illegally seize property through intimidation and false documentation. That is something my office takes very seriously. I want you to fax or email me everything they gave you, every document, every notice, every piece of paper, and do not communicate with them further without legal representation. I cannot afford a long legal battle, I admitted. Farming does not exactly make me rich. You are not going to need to pay for anything, Thomas said. If this is what I think it is, my office will handle it. Consider me your attorney as of right now. You were the grandson of a man who saved my life in combat. There is no way I am letting some power-hungry HOA steal his land. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, sir. I do not know what to say. Just send me those documents and sit tight. Oh, and if they show up at your property again, record everything. Video, audio, whatever you can get. People like this tend to dig their own graves if you give them enough rope. After I hung up, I immediately scanned all the documents Brenda had given me and emailed them to the Attorney General's office. Then I called Marcus back and told him to still come out, but that I now had legal representation. He sounded relieved. Marcus arrived around 3 in the afternoon with a truck full of surveying equipment and a thick folder of documents. We walked the southeastern boundary of my property together while he explained how property surveys worked and showed me the original markers that had been placed decades ago. See these iron stakes? He said, pointing to a metal rod driven into the ground. These were placed here in 1947 when your grandfather first bought the land. They have been verified multiple times over the years, including when the Meadowbrook Heights development was approved. There is absolutely no overlap between your property and their development. So how are they claiming there is? I asked. Marcus shook his head. My guess is they either fabricated a survey or they are misreading the documents. But any legitimate surveyor would immediately see that their claim is bogus. This would not hold up in any court. Well, I now have the Attorney General looking into it, so hopefully this gets resolved quickly. Marcus's eyes widened. The actual Attorney General? How did you manage that? He served with my grandfather in the Army, I explained. They were friends. Brandon, you might be the luckiest farmer in Missouri right now. Most people fighting HOA disputes spend years in court and tens of thousands of dollars. You've got the top law enforcement official in the state on your side. We finished the survey, and Marcus provided me with certified documents showing my exact property boundaries. He also wrote a detailed letter explaining that there was no encroachment and that any claim otherwise was false. I sent all of that to Thomas Wright's office as well. For the next few days, things were quiet. I went about my normal farming routine, tending to the cattle, fixing fence posts, and getting ready for the fall harvest. But I kept my phone close by and made sure my security cameras were working. I'd installed them a few years ago after some teenagers had tried to tip over a cow, and now I was glad I had them. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the first visit, the golf carts returned. This time there were more of them, maybe 8 or 9, and they were not alone. A tow truck was with them, along with a white van that had Meadowbrook Property Management written on the side. I immediately started recording on my phone and walked down to meet them at the property line. Brenda was there again, along with Gerald and several other HOA board members I did not recognize. A large man in a work uniform got out of the tow truck. "Mr. Paterson," Brenda called out as I approached, "since you have refused to comply with our directives, we are here to take enforcement action." "What are you talking about?" I asked, still recording. "Your vehicles are parked on HOA property," Gerald said, reading from a clipboard. "Specifically, your red pickup truck and your tractor are in violation of parking regulations. We are authorized to have them towed." I looked back at my truck, which was parked exactly where it had been parked for the last 3 years, about 50 yards from the road on my driveway. The tractor was near the barn, easily 300 yards from the road. "Those vehicles are on my private property," I said slowly. "You have no authority to tow anything." "The surveyed boundary puts them within HOA jurisdiction," Brenda said. "We have given you ample time to comply. Now we are exercising our rights under the HOA covenant to enforce regulations." The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable. "Madam, are you sure about this? He is saying this is private property." "We have documentation," Brenda snapped. "Do your job." I stepped in front of the tow truck. "If you set foot on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I have legal representation, and you are being recorded." "Legal representation?" Brenda laughed. "Please, no judge is going to side with you over properly filed HOA documents. Now move aside, or we will add obstruction to your list of violations." "I am represented by the Attorney General of Missouri," I said calmly. "Thomas Wright. Perhaps you have heard of him?" The color drained from Brenda's face. Gerald's mouth fell open. Several of the other HOA members started whispering to each other. "You are lying," Brenda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. I pulled up the email correspondence on my phone and showed her the messages from the Attorney General's office. "I am not lying, and every action you have taken, every threat you have made, has been documented and sent to his office. So I'm going to give you one chance to turn around and leave before this gets much worse for you." The tow truck driver held up his hands. "I am out of here. I'm not getting involved in whatever this is." He got back in his truck and drove away without another word. Brenda's face had turned red, a combination of anger and what I suspected was fear. "This is not over. We have rights. We have documentation." "Your documentation is fraudulent," I said, "and Attorney General Wright is investigating how you obtained it. So unless you want to add to the charges being compiled against you, I suggest you leave. Now." They retreated to their golf carts, but I could see Brenda on her phone, gesturing wildly as she spoke to someone. The convoy drove away, and I immediately called the Attorney General's office to report what had just happened. The young man I spoke with said he would pass the information along immediately. 10 minutes later, Thomas Wright himself called me back. "Brandon, I just watched the video you sent. You handled that perfectly. I need you to file a police report right now for attempted theft and trespassing. I'm also going to have my investigators pull all the documents the HOA filed with the county regarding their boundaries." "Do you think they actually falsified a survey?" I asked. "I think they either did that or they intentionally misrepresented the boundaries when they filed their HOA paperwork. Either way, it is illegal. The question is whether it is just civil fraud or criminal fraud. Attempting to tow your vehicles off your own property pushes this into criminal territory." I drove into Springfield and filed a report with the Greene County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who took my statement looked skeptical at first, but when I mentioned the Attorney General was involved, his attitude changed quickly. He said an investigator would be in touch. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated rapidly. The Attorney General's office sent investigators to interview the Meadowbrook Heights HOA board members, the property management company they had hired, and the surveying company whose name appeared on the documents they had provided. It turned out that the surveying company had never actually done any work for the HOA. Someone had forged their letterhead and created fake survey documents. Thomas Wright called me personally to update me. "Brandon, this is bigger than we initially thought. The HOA board hired a consulting company to help them expand their boundaries. This company, run by a man named Richard Stokes, has apparently been running this scam across multiple states. They identify properties adjacent to HOA communities, create fraudulent boundary documents, and then pressure the property owners into paying dues and compliance fees. Most people either pay or sell their property rather than fight it. "How many people has he done this to?" I asked, shocked. "We are still investigating, but in Missouri alone, we've identified at least 14 cases. Nationwide, it could be over 100. The FBI is now involved because this crosses state lines. You stumbling onto this and having connections to me might have just broken open a major fraud operation." "What about Brenda and the HOA board? Did they know it was fraud?" "That is what we are trying to determine. Some of them might have been duped by Stokes as well, but Brenda Cunningham and Gerald Whitmore appear to have known exactly what they were doing. We found email correspondence showing they specifically sought out Stokes because they wanted to expand the HOA boundaries to generate more revenue. They were planning to target several other properties after yours." "So what happens now?" "Now we finish building the case. I have enough to shut down their operation immediately. I'm filing an injunction today that will prohibit the Meadowbrook Heights HOA from taking any enforcement actions against anyone pending a full investigation. I'm also going to make sure your property rights are formally protected. As for criminal charges, that is up to the county prosecutor, but I will be recommending charges of fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy." True to his word, by the end of the week, the Attorney General's office had filed a comprehensive injunction against the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly I was getting calls from reporters wanting interviews. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with one reporter from the Springfield News Leader because I wanted the full story out there. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition with the headline, "Attorney General Stops HOA Land Grab Scheme." It detailed the whole operation, from the fraudulent surveys to the intimidation tactics. What I did not know until I read the article was that Richard Stokes, the consultant behind the scheme, had been arrested by the FBI at his home in Branson. He was facing federal wire fraud charges. The response from the community was overwhelming. I received dozens of calls and emails from people thanking me for exposing the fraud. Several other property owners in the area came forward with similar stories of the HOA trying to pressure them into compliance. One elderly woman, Mrs. Patricia Simmons, told me she had actually paid the HOA $15,000 in back dues because she was too scared to fight them. The Attorney General's office helped her file a complaint to get her money back. About a month after the initial confrontation, I was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. The Greene County Prosecutor's Office was seeking indictments against Brenda Cunningham, Gerald Whitmore, and Richard Stokes on multiple criminal charges. I drove to the courthouse in Springfield on a cold October morning and spent 3 hours answering questions about everything that had happened. The grand jury process was nothing like what you see on television. It was just me, the prosecutor, and the grand jurors in a room. No defense attorneys, no judge, just questions and answers. I told them everything, from the first visit to the attempted towing of my vehicles. I provided copies of all the documents, the videos I had recorded, and the survey results from Marcus Chen. 2 weeks later, the indictments came down. Brenda Cunningham and Gerald Whitmore were each charged with 3 counts of fraud, 1 count of attempted theft, and 1 count of conspiracy. Richard Stokes was facing federal charges, but the state also charged him with organized crime activities. The other HOA board members were not charged criminally, but they faced civil lawsuits from multiple property owners. The arraignment was scheduled for early November, and I made sure to attend. The courthouse was packed with people from Meadowbrook Heights, some supporting the defendants, others clearly angry about what had happened. I sat in the back and watched as Brenda and Gerald were brought in with their attorneys. Brenda looked nothing like the confident woman who had marched up my driveway demanding compliance. She wore a conservative gray suit and kept her eyes down. Gerald was sweating profusely despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. They both pled not guilty, and bail was set at $50,000 each. As I was leaving the courthouse, a man in an expensive suit approached me. "Mr. Paterson? My name is David Morrison. I represent the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Well, what is left of it? I wanted to speak with you about a settlement." "A settlement for what?" I asked. "Your clients tried to steal my land." I understand. And please believe me when I say the current board had nothing to do with that. Mrs. Cunningham and Mr. Whitmore have been removed from their positions. The new board wants to make this right. We are prepared to offer you compensation for your trouble and a formal apology. I do not want your money, I said. I just want to be left alone to run my farm. We can guarantee that in writing, Morrison said. We will also pay for an independent survey to be filed with the county that clearly establishes the boundaries. There will be no question about where your property ends and the HOA begins. Please, Mr. Paterson, many innocent people bought homes in that development. They had nothing to do with this scheme, and now their property values are plummeting because of the scandal. A settlement would help restore confidence in the community. I thought about it for a moment. I did not have any ill will toward the regular homeowners in Meadowbrook Heights. They were just trying to live their lives. Fine, I will agree to a settlement on one condition. The HOA has to pay back every penny that Mrs. Simmons and anyone else paid in fraudulent dues. And I want a formal written apology published in the newspaper and posted at the entrance to your development. Done, Morrison said immediately. I will have the paperwork drawn up by the end of the week. The settlement was finalized in December. The HOA paid for a new survey that was filed with the county, clearly establishing that no part of my farm was within their boundaries. They also issued a public apology that was published in the Springfield News Leader and posted on a large sign at the Meadowbrook Heights entrance. Mrs. Simmons got her $15,000 back, plus interest. 3 other property owners who had paid smaller amounts were also reimbursed. The criminal case moved forward slowly, as these things tend to do. Brenda Cunningham's attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she had relied on the advice of Richard Stokes and did not know the documents were fraudulent. The judge was not buying it. The email evidence clearly showed she knew what she was doing. In February, facing overwhelming evidence, Gerald Whitmore took a plea deal. He agreed to testify against Brenda and Stokes in exchange for reduced charges. He pled guilty to 1 count of fraud and received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. He also had to pay restitution to the victims. Brenda held out longer, but in March, her attorney finally convinced her that going to trial was a losing proposition. She pled guilty to 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in county jail with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of probation. She also had to pay significant restitution. Richard Stokes got the worst of it. The federal government prosecuted him for wire fraud and running a criminal enterprise. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The state charges were dropped as part of an agreement to avoid double jeopardy, but the federal sentence was more than enough. The FBI estimated his scheme had defrauded people out of more than $2 million across 8 states. Through all of this, I tried to keep my focus on the farm. The attention from the case brought some unexpected benefits. A local news station did a feature on family farms in Missouri and highlighted my operation. That led to some new customers for my beef cattle and even a contract with a local restaurant that wanted to source locally raised meat. In April, Thomas Wright came to visit the farm in person. It was the first time we had met face to face, and I was struck by how much he reminded me of my grandfather. He had the same quiet confidence and steady demeanor. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," Thomas said as we walked through the pastures. "Bobby always stood up for what was right, no matter the cost. You did the same thing." "I just wanted to protect my land," I said. "I never expected it to turn into a major investigation." "That is how these things usually work," Thomas replied. "One person stands up, and it gives others the courage to do the same. We have received reports of similar HOA schemes in 3 other states now, all because of the publicity from your case. You might have helped dozens of people without even knowing it." We stopped at the old barn, the one Brenda had called an eyesore. Thomas ran his hand along the weathered wood. "This barn has more character than any of those cookie-cutter houses in that development. Never let anyone tell you that your way of life is not valuable. We need farms like this. We need people who understand the land and respect it." "Are you going to run for another term?" I asked. The Attorney General election was coming up next year. Thomas smiled. "I am thinking about it. But I'm getting old. Maybe it is time to let someone younger take over. Either way, I'm glad I was able to help Bobby's grandson before I retire. After Thomas left, I stood on my porch and looked out over the farm. The sun was setting behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the distance, and I could hear the chickens settling in for the night. Everything was exactly as it should be. The Meadowbrook Heights development was still there, of course. I could see the roof lines of the houses beyond the tree line, but they kept their distance now. The new HOA board was careful to stay within their boundaries and mind their own business. Occasionally, I would see people walking their dogs along the road, and we would exchange friendly waves. The scandal had been a hard lesson for everyone involved. In May, a year after the whole ordeal began, I received a letter from the Missouri Farm Bureau. They were giving me an award for defending agricultural property rights at their annual convention. I almost did not go, but Marcus convinced me I should. The convention was in Columbia, and I took the day off from farm work to attend. The banquet hall was filled with farmers from across the state, men and women who worked the land just like I did. When they called my name and I walked up to accept the award, the entire room stood and applauded. It was overwhelming. The president of the Farm Bureau shook my hand and said, "You stood up for all of us. Thank you." I gave a short speech, thanking Thomas Wright and everyone who had supported me. But mostly I talked about my grandfather and how he had taught me that some things were worth fighting for. Land was not just property. It was legacy. It was history. It was the blood, sweat, and tears of generations who had worked to build something lasting. When I got back to the farm that evening, I found a package waiting on my porch. There was no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. It showed my grandfather and Thomas Wright in their Army uniforms, both young men with their whole lives ahead of them. On the back, someone had written, "Bobby Paterson and Tom Wright, Fort Benning, 1968, brothers in arms then and always." There was also a note from Thomas. "I found this going through some old boxes. Thought you might like to have it. Bobby saved my life in Vietnam. I am glad I could return the favor by helping save his farm. Stay strong, Brandon. You are exactly the kind of man this country needs. Tom." I hung the photograph in my living room, right above the fireplace where my grandfather's other military memorabilia was displayed. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded that we never truly stand alone. We are all connected by invisible threads of history, friendship, and shared values. The summer came and went, and the farm thrived. I hired a couple of high school kids to help with the harvest, and we brought in one of the best crops I had seen in years. The beef cattle sold well, and I even expanded my herd by 20 head. The restaurant contract turned into several more contracts with local businesses that wanted to advertise their use of locally sourced ingredients. In September, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who was making a film about HOA overreach in America. She wanted to feature my story as a central case study. I agreed, figuring that the more people knew about these scams, the better. The filming took place over several days, and they interviewed me, Thomas Wright, Marcus Chen, and even Mrs. Simmons. The documentary premiered at a film festival in Kansas City the following spring and won an award for Best Documentary Short. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The media attention faded, and I went back to being just another farmer trying to make a living off the land. But I never forgot the lessons I learned during those months of fighting the HOA. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it feels like you are facing impossible odds. I learned that help can come from unexpected places, and that the friendships our ancestors forged can echo through generations. Most importantly, I learned that the law, when properly applied, can protect the little guy from those who would abuse their power. The Meadowbrook Heights development continued to grow, adding more houses and more families. But there was never another attempt to expand the HOA boundaries beyond their legal limits. The new board operated transparently and fairly, and they even reached out to neighboring property owners to establish good relationships. It turned out that when people acted with honesty and respect, everyone benefited. In October, I attended the sentencing hearing for Brenda Cunningham. I was not required to be there, but I felt I should see it through to the end. She stood before the judge looking tired and defeated. Her attorney made an impassioned plea for leniency, talking about her contributions to the community and her lack of prior criminal record. The judge listened patiently, then said something I will never forget. "Mrs. Cunningham, you held a position of trust within your community. People relied on you to act in their best interests. Instead, you used that position to perpetrate a fraud that could have destroyed an innocent man's livelihood. The harm you caused extends far beyond the financial. You undermined trust in the very concept of community governance. That breach of trust cannot be taken lightly." When the sentence was handed down, 18 months in jail with 3 years of probation, Brenda finally broke down and cried. I did not feel any satisfaction watching it. I just felt sad that someone could throw away their reputation and freedom over greed and a hunger for power. As I left the courthouse that day, Gerald Whitmore was standing outside, smoking a cigarette. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might say something, but he just nodded slightly and turned away. He had gotten probation instead of jail time because he had cooperated, but his life was still in ruins. He had lost his job, his standing in the community, and from what I heard, his marriage was falling apart. I drove home thinking about how different choices lead to different outcomes. Brenda and Gerald had chosen to take the easy path, to cut corners and manipulate the system for their own gain. It had seemed smart at the time, I was sure, but in the end, it had cost them everything. Meanwhile, I had chosen to stand firm on principle, even when it was scary and uncertain. That choice had led to justice, not just for me, but for everyone they had victimized. The holidays came, and I invited Marcus and his family to the farm for Thanksgiving. We cooked a turkey from birds I had raised myself and used vegetables from my garden. It was a good day, filled with laughter and stories. Marcus's kids ran around the property, marveling at the animals and the wide open spaces. His wife told me it was nice to see a place that was real, not manufactured or artificial. In December, I received a Christmas card from Thomas Wright. He was officially retiring as Attorney General at the end of the year. His note said he was looking forward to spending time with his grandchildren and maybe doing some fishing. He thanked me again for giving him the opportunity to help Bobby's grandson and said it was one of the highlights of his career. I sent him a card back, along with a package of steaks from my cattle. I told him he was welcome at the farm any time, that I would be honored to take him fishing in the pond on the North 40. My grandfather had built that pond himself, and it was stocked with bass and catfish. It seemed fitting that the two men who had been such good friends might reconnect through their connection to me and this land. The new year brought fresh challenges and opportunities. I started exploring the possibility of offering farm tours for school groups, figuring it might be good to help kids understand where their food comes from. I also joined the board of the local Farm Bureau chapter, wanting to give back to the organization that had supported me. One cold January morning, I was out checking on the cattle when I saw a car pull up my driveway. For a split second, I felt that old anxiety return, wondering if it was the HOA coming back. But as the car got closer, I saw it was just a young couple in a sedan. They got out nervously, and the woman called out, "Mr. Paterson, we are so sorry to bother you. We live in Meadowbrook Heights, and we just wanted to thank you." I walked over to meet them. "Thank me for what?" The man spoke up. "We bought our house right before the scandal broke. We almost lost everything because property values were crashing. But because you stood up to the HOA and forced them to change, the neighborhood recovered. Our house is actually worth more now than when we bought it. You saved our investment." The woman nodded enthusiastically. "And more than that, you showed us that it is possible to fight back against bullies and win. We have been telling everyone we know about what you did." We talked for a few minutes, and I learned they were teachers at one of the Springfield elementary schools. Before they left, I gave them my contact information and told them if they ever wanted to bring their students out for a farm tour, they were welcome. They promised to take me up on it. Incidents like that happened more often than I expected. People would stop by to say thank you, or I would get recognized at the feed store or the farmer's market. It was strange being a minor celebrity, but I tried to handle it with grace. I always redirected the credit to Thomas Wright and the others who had helped make justice possible. In March, the documentary about HOA overreach was released online and quickly went viral. Within a week, it had been viewed over 1 million times. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from news outlets across the country. I agreed to do a few, mainly national outlets that could reach a wide audience. I figured if my story could help even one person stand up to a corrupt HOA, it was worth the inconvenience. One of the interviews was with a cable news network. The host asked me what advice I would give to other people facing similar situations. I thought carefully before answering. First, document everything. Every interaction, every document they give you, every threat they make. Keep records because you will need them. Second, do not be afraid to ask for help. I got incredibly lucky having a connection to the Attorney General, but there are legal aid organizations and property rights groups that can help. Third, know your rights. Research your property boundaries, understand the laws in your state, and do not let anyone intimidate you with fake authority. Finally, stand your ground. These bullies count on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. When you refuse to back down, you take away their power. The interview was played and replayed on social media. I started getting messages from people all over the country who were dealing with HOA issues. I could not help them all individually, but I connected several of them with attorneys and property rights organizations. It felt good to pay forward the help I had received. Spring arrived and the farm came alive with new growth. I plowed the fields and planted corn and soybeans. The cattle had calves, and I spent long days making sure all the newborns were healthy and thriving. It was exhausting work, but it was honest work. The kind of work that let you sleep soundly at night knowing you had earned your rest. In April, Thomas Wright made good on my invitation and came out to the farm for a weekend. We spent Saturday afternoon fishing at the pond, not talking much, just enjoying the peace and quiet. He caught a 5-pound bass that put a huge smile on his face. That evening, we grilled steaks and sat on the porch watching the sunset. You know, Thomas said, I handled hundreds of cases during my time as Attorney General. Some were important, some were high profile. But this one, helping you protect Bobby's farm, this one meant more to me than all the others combined. It felt personal. It felt right. I cannot thank you enough, I said. Without you, I would have lost everything. No, Thomas said firmly. You would have found a way. You have Bobby's stubbornness and his integrity. Those qualities do not lose in the long run. I just helped speed up the inevitable. We talked late into the night, sharing stories about my grandfather and Thomas's time in the military. He told me about the day my grandfather had pulled him out of an ambush in Vietnam, how Bobby had charged into enemy fire without hesitation to save his friend. I told him about growing up on the farm, learning to drive a tractor before I could legally drive a car, and all the lessons my grandfather had taught me about hard work and honor. When Thomas left on Sunday, I felt like I had gained not just an ally, but a true friend. He promised to come back in the fall for hunting season, and I looked forward to it. The summer was busy with farm work, but I made time for the things that mattered. I hosted those school tours I had planned, bringing out groups of kids who had never seen a working farm before. Their faces lit up when they saw the baby calves and collected eggs from the chicken coop. A few teachers told me later that some students had written essays about the experience, talking about how it changed their perspective on where food comes from. In July, I got word that Richard Stokes had tried to appeal his federal conviction. The appeal was denied. He would serve his full 6 years, and even then, he would face civil lawsuits from victims trying to recover their losses. His fraudulent empire had collapsed completely, and authorities across multiple states were working to return money to the people he had scammed. August brought the county fair, and I entered several of my cattle in the livestock competition. I won 2 blue ribbons and a grand champion designation for my best bull. It was a proud moment, standing in the ring with my animals while the crowd applauded. Farming had its challenges, but moments like that made it all worthwhile. As September arrived and the weather started to cool, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past 16 months. What had started as a simple confrontation with an overreaching HOA had turned into a major legal case that exposed fraud across multiple states. I had gone from being an unknown farmer to someone whose story was being used to educate others about property rights and standing up to corruption. But through it all, the most important thing had not changed. I still woke up every morning on the same land my grandfather had worked. I still tended the same fields, cared for the livestock, and watched the sun rise over the same hills. The farm was my legacy, my responsibility, and my joy. No HOA, no matter how aggressive or fraudulent, could take that away from me. The Meadowbrook Heights development had stabilized under new leadership. Property values had recovered, and the community seemed to be functioning well. I bore them no ill will. The vast majority of residents there were good people who had been as victimized by Brenda and Gerald as anyone else. We were neighbors now, in the truest sense, respecting each other's boundaries and occasionally helping out when needed. In October, I attended the Farm Bureau convention again, this time as a speaker rather than an award recipient. I talked about the importance of protecting agricultural property rights and encouraged other farmers to know their legal protections. The response was enthusiastic, and several people approached me afterward to share their own stories of dealing with encroaching development. One older farmer from the Booth Heel region told me he had been fighting a similar battle with a development company that wanted to force him to sell his land. After hearing my story, he had contacted an attorney and discovered that the company had been using intimidation tactics that were illegal. He was now fighting back, and he thanked me for inspiring him to stand up. Stories like that reminded me why going through the ordeal had been worth it. Change does not happen in isolation. It happens when people share their experiences and support each other in fighting injustice. November brought hunting season, and true to his word, Thomas Wright returned to the farm. We spent a weekend in the woods, and he managed to bag a nice 8-point buck. We field-dressed it together, and I showed him how to properly butcher the meat. He took half the venison home with him, pleased as could be with his trophy. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself counting my blessings. I had my health, my farm, my freedom, and friends who had stood by me when things got tough. The legal battle was over, the criminals had been punished, and justice had been served. Life was good. On Thanksgiving Day, I invited not just Marcus and his family, but also Mrs. Simmons, the elderly woman who had been scammed by the HOA. She brought her famous pecan pie and regaled us with stories from her 50 years of living in Greene County. It was a loud, chaotic, wonderful day, filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from genuine friendship and shared experiences. As the year drew to a close, I took stock of my farm's finances. Thanks to the new contracts and the publicity from the case, I had had my best year financially in over a decade. I was able to pay off some equipment loans and even start a small savings account for future emergencies. The farm was not just surviving, it was thriving. In December, I received one final piece of news related to the case. The FBI had completed its nationwide investigation into Richard Stokes's fraud operation. They had identified 137 victims across 11 states, with total losses exceeding $3 million. Criminal charges had been filed in multiple jurisdictions, and civil asset forfeiture had recovered about 40% of the stolen money. It was not everything, but it was something, and it had all started because I had refused to back down when someone tried to steal my grandfather's farm. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my porch as midnight approached. The temperature was below freezing, and I could see my breath in the cold air. In the distance, I heard fireworks from the Meadowbrook Heights neighborhood as people celebrated the arrival of a new year. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to them, to my grandfather, to Thomas Wright, and to everyone who had played a part in this journey. The farm was quiet, peaceful, and secure. 300 acres of Missouri land that would continue to be worked and cared for by a Paterson, just as it had been for nearly 80 years. Some things were worth fighting for, worth standing up for, worth protecting with everything you had. As the clock struck midnight and the new year began, I walked inside, grateful for the past and optimistic about the future. The battle with the HOA was over, but the work of farming never stopped. Tomorrow I would wake up early, tend to the animals, check the equipment, and plan for the spring planting. It was the same routine I had followed for years, and it was exactly what I wanted to be doing. Life had thrown me an unexpected challenge, and I had met it head-on. In the process, I had discovered reserves of strength I did not know I possessed, made friendships that would last a lifetime, and helped protect not just my own property, but the property rights of countless others. It was more than I could have imagined when I first saw that convoy of golf carts rolling down my dirt road. But now it was done, and justice had prevailed. The farm was safe, the criminals were punished, and life could return to its comfortable rhythms. As I climbed into bed that night, I felt a profound sense of peace. My grandfather would have been proud. Thomas Wright had been right about that. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.